That's a interesting question. It's a good leadoff question. We've all observed the poor communication that occurs when these two groups are talking. And I've thought about it a lot, and I think there are several answers to that question. I think part of it is that the two groups speak very different languages. They're trained in different ways. Furthermore, conservationists focus more on animal populations, and cat advocates and animal welfare advocates focus more on individual animals. So they begin with sort of different perspectives and different ways of valuing animals, either in groups or as individuals. So that creates an initial disconnect or discontinuity. But what makes it particularly bad, I think, is the fact that these discussions and these arguments take place in the absence of the kind of information that would be needed to direct them more constructively. We don't really know exactly how many outdoor cats there are in most places. We know there are some in many places, but we don't really know how many there are. We don't know where there are a lot of cats usually versus relatively few cats. And we don't know where they are having a large effect on wildlife versus a small effect or versus a negligible effect. And when you have two groups that start with different priorities and different languages that they feel strongly about, and then they try to discuss the issue in the absence of good information, you get the sort of situation that we all see, because everybody assumes a reality that fits their narrative without knowing what the reality really is. So that's one of the reasons, and we'll get to the DC Cat Count project at the end, but that's one of the reasons we did that project. We felt like those conversations could be best improved by encouraging people to create the information that would allow them to be more constructive about where cats are, how many there are, and what their impacts are, and what kinds of management are working well and which kinds of management are not working well. There are not as many examples as we would like there to be, but their number is growing. There are some examples to discuss, and I'm relatively confident that there will be more examples in the near future. One example that deserves to be highlighted that has been present for a number of years is a collaboration between the feral cat advocates and the Audubon group, the bird conservation group in Portland, Oregon. Now, this is a local project, but those two groups have been working together to try to count cats and to try and work toward their shared goals for a number of years now, and they've been very successful. So I would encourage people to look into that more if they would like an example of cooperation. Beyond that, some of the work that the DC Cat Count Project has done has generated interest in developing new collaborative projects that involve both cat advocates and animal welfare groups and conservation groups to manage cats towards shared goals in various places. We believe that there's a good chance that there will be one or more projects that fit this description in Hawaii, in the Hawaiian Islands. There's significant effort underway to create a project like that in Lanzarote and the Canary Islands that we're very hopeful will be successful ultimately. So there are not, again, there are not as many good examples as I would like, but I have seen evidence that there's more and more willingness to explore collaborations of this sort in recent years. And, you know, the keys to those collaborations being successful are choosing good partners, focusing on the shared goals and not focusing on the differences of perspective, and a commitment to collecting the kind of information that will allow everybody to agree on the reality and on the impact of the project. This is a very, very interesting question, and one that I and colleagues are doing some work on. I think the premise of the question is premise of the first part of the question is very accurate. I think that most of the discussion about the impact of cats on wildlife has focused on trying to estimate the number of predation events that occur. Now, we could argue how good those estimates of predation events are. People have different perspectives, but it's completely true that the impact of cats on wildlife is not fully explained simply by the number of predation events. 1,000 predation events on species X in this place may have a large effect. 1,000 predations on species Y in this place may have no effect at all in an ecological sense. And interestingly, there are ways that ecologists can study communities and populations to try and understand the real impacts of these kinds of events. And we need to encourage scientists to explore those sorts of research and pathways with regard to cats and not simply accept estimates of predation as a proxy or as an indicator of impact. Now, that's not to say there's no impact there. I'm certain that there are places and situations where there are large impacts. I'm equally certain that there are places and situations where there are minimal impacts or no impacts. So we need to use our best science and our best approaches to try to understand how to tell these different places apart from one another, rather than lumping them all together into one category, which is essentially what's often happened in the past. So there's a great deal of work to do on exactly that. There's several things that members of the animal welfare community can do to make these sorts of productive collaborations and discussions more likely. One is to, as is the case in most arguments, to make an effort to actually listen to the concerns of the other group. There are, from a conservation perspective, and that's where I do most of my work, there are many, many reasons to be very worried about trends in the natural world. And certainly cats might contribute to those in some places. So this is not a trivial, it's not trivial when conservationists express concerns about declining bird numbers or declining wildlife numbers. Those things are very real. And by understanding and acknowledging that those concerns are real, you can, form the basis for a more productive discussion. Beyond that, if you start to think about a collaboration, I've already touched upon a couple of things that I think are the keys to making the collaboration work. One is to commit to focusing on the goals that you share with your collaborators, which are usually reducing the number of outdoor cats in critical areas as humanely as possible. Focus on that. Don't focus on everything else. And to commit to trying to gather reliable information about the effects of your project, rather than just hoping for the best, okay? That gives everybody confidence that not only are you working toward the same goal, but you will agree on whether you're meeting the goal or whether you're not meeting the goal. In the absence of that kind of information gathering, everybody is just free to draw their own conclusion, and it will probably be a different conclusion. So those, I think, are some of the key factors that can make these collaborations work better. So again, things would be well served if conservationists could better foster an appreciation of the priorities of animal welfare advocates and try to listen to what those are. Focus on shared goals, as I said before, focus on data, as I said before. But beyond that, here's an argument that I often make to my colleagues in the conservation community. And that is that in conservation, we need as many strong advocates as possible. For most people, conservation is something they're concerned about, but it's not the most important thing to them. it's sort of important to them. I feel like if conservationists attempt to make partners out of people from animal welfare who are already concerned about animals, they could build a much larger constituency of strong supporters for conservation, and we need those strong supporters. In addition, the animal welfare enterprise is large. There's a lot of potential good that can be done in a collaborative framework by helping to direct the efforts of animal welfare into productive approaches to solving these shared goals, rather than alienate one another. So I think there's more to be gained for conservation from trying to make animal welfare partners than there is to try to argue them down and prove that, you know, conservationists are right. So the goal of the DC cat count, which just concluded very recently as a 3-year project, was to do a intensive investigation of the various methods we can use to count cats, to try to then make that methodology as accessible and available to a wide variety of users as possible, and at the same time to set an example of how animal welfare organizations and conservation-oriented scientists can work together toward common goals. So I think it was a very successful project. We tested many methods of cat counting. We created what we call a toolkit that is accessible to everybody, that describes all of the different aspects and types of cat counting and is hopefully a good way to get started, both with identifying how cat counting can help your particular projects and also just to understand it better. And finally, I think we had a very successful collaboration with a very diverse group of project participants where we all stayed cooperative and working toward the same goals. So I would encourage everybody, there's too much to talk about in a short answer, but I would encourage everybody to go to the relevant website and especially to the hub site where we share the toolkit. And I'm assuming that when you prepare this proposal, you can put those links into the answer. So we hope that this will be one of the ways that groups that want to become more quantitative and that want to collaborate with conservation groups or public health individuals or their universities will be comfortable in learning more about these approaches and then moving forward.